Hello Year 9s, welcome to this week's lesson. We're going to be doing a classic practical about plant nutrition, and that is testing leaves for starch. Now before I go on any further, I need to say this is not something that you can do at home. I don't want you to try to recreate this practical at all, it's not safe. And on that note as well, I'm going to be making sure I'm wearing the correct protective equipment, a lab coat because iodine can stain clothing and skin, and also some goggles which I'll put on later when I get the practical started. Okay, so over the last couple of lessons, you've learned two main important things that are needed for this lesson. First of all, you learned the equation for photosynthesis, and in that lesson you learned that glucose was one of the products of that equation. A necessary product, and in the second lesson you learned some of the different ways that plants make use of that glucose, and of course one of those ways is storing the glucose as starch within the leaf. So essentially what this practical is, testing a leaf for starch, is actually testing whether photosynthesis is occurring or not. Because wherever photosynthesis happens you'll have glucose, and wherever you get glucose you get starch. So if we can prove that starch is present, that also proves that photosynthesis has been happening. Now I'm going to bring the camera in a little bit closer now to watch the practical, and again before we get started I would just like to mention a couple of things. So we've got a basil plant here that I happen to have at home, and you can see it's a very green plant which indicates the presence of chloroplasts filled with chlorophyll, and so photosynthesis will be happening in these leaves. Now we always focus on the leaves when we're talking about photosynthesis, but it's important to notice, for example, the stalks here are green as well. So there will be photosynthesis happening in the cells here in the stem. So wherever a plant is green, photosynthesis will be happening. It's not just the leaves. We tend to focus on the leaves because they are specially adapted to do most photosynthesis. Okay. Secondly, we're going to be using iodine to test for starch, which is something you've done before, and should remember that iodine is an orange colour and turns blue-black in the presence of starch. So just as a quick reminder of that, I've got some rice here in this Petri dish. If I just drop some iodine on that, you can see that straight away it goes that classic blue-black colour. Okay, now this practical isn't just going to be drop some iodine onto a leaf. Okay, if I just show you what happens there, I've cut a little bit off of this leaf, and if I just drop some iodine onto that, okay, we can see that it stays the orange colour. Okay, I'll just move that there so the camera can catch it a bit better. We can see that it stays that orange colour and we're not seeing any blue-black colour at all. Okay. And it's not that there isn't any starch in that leaf, it's that the leaf is, the starch is inside the plant cells, and they're protected by a plant cell wall, by a cell membrane, and even the chloroplast membrane as well. So the steps in this practical are all designed to break down the cell wall and cell membrane and allow the iodine into the cells of the leaf. Also, leaves are green, and we need to remove that green chlorophyll so that we can see the colour change more quickly. So there are two steps in this practical. The first one breaks down the cell walls and membranes. The second step is to remove the chlorophyll. Okay, so what leaves am I using? Well, I've taken a leaf from the basil plant, and we went out into the garden and we found a nice leaf from one of the weeds around the edge of our garden. So we're going to try with both of those and we'll see what happens there. Okay, so first step, I've got some boiling water here on the stove, and I'm just going to pop the leaf straight into that boiling water. Okay. Now, if you were doing this as a practical in the lesson, we wouldn't be having the Bunsen burners out because the second step involves using alcohol, and it's not safe to have naked flames around alcohol. You would probably have used freshly boiled water from a kettle to heat it. So we're going to let this boil for roughly a minute or so. And so whilst that is boiling, I'll just explain what's happening. So right now the hot water is in the process of weakening the cell wall and disrupting it. Okay, and it's also in the process of breaking down the cell membranes as well that surround the plant cells. That's going to allow the alcohol that we're going to use in the second step to get into the leaf and removes the chlorophyll from the chloroplasts as well. And crucially, it'll also allow the iodine to do that. Okay, so once I've finished letting this boil, what we're going to do next is remove it. I'll describe to you what the leaf is like, and then we are going to set up a hot water bath with some alcohol. So I'll just get that ready now. I'll remove this basil plant out of the way, and we've got a beaker here, and I'll just pop the kettle on quickly just to reboil the water. Okay, now in the lab we would use pure isopropyl alcohol. I don't have any of that at home. I do have some 70% alcohol from a medical kit that we've got, so I'm using that, and it should be enough to do the job. Okay. So what I've done is I've put some of that alcohol into a boiling tube, which is stoppered. Okay. And the reason that is because currently the gas is on over there with a naked flame. So I don't want any of those alcohol vapours escaping into the air whilst we've got a naked flame. Okay. Right, I think that's been about a minute that this is boiled for. Okay, so I'll just turn that off and we'll remove the leaves. So straight away you might be able to see that the leaves are much softer. Okay, they're not holding their shape at all. Here's the basil leaf. Okay, the basil leaf has retained quite a lot of its colour actually, whereas the weed has lost its colour. It's gone a lot more darker green. Okay, there we go. The plants feel much less firm, much more soft and much more delicate from that boiling process. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to pop both of these leaves into this alcohol, if I can get them to go in. That's the next challenge. Okay, this one will be a little bit more challenging. I think we'll just push it straight in, and then we need to get that alcohol boiling. Okay, and the alcohol is going to basically remove the chlorophyll from the leaf so that we can have a nice clear leaf to see the colour change of the starch. So I've basically put some freshly boiled water into the beaker, okay, and that's going to start heating up the alcohol inside. Now what will we see when this is happening? Well, basically alcohol's got a boiling point of 78 degrees Celsius, whereas water's boiling point is 100. So that means once the alcohol is heated up to higher than 78 degrees, it'll actually start boiling inside that boiling tube, even though the water itself isn't boiling. And you'll also see the alcohol begin to turn green, and it'll go greener and greener as more and more of the chlorophyll is drawn out of that leaf. Okay. Now this can take anywhere up to 5 to 10 minutes in order to draw most of the chlorophyll out. So what I'm probably going to do is pause the video and I'll sort of come back when I'm at the end and ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so this has been boiling now for just about 10 minutes actually in the end, and we can see now, if I just lift this out, that the alcohol is nice and green. Okay, and the alcohol is boiling away vigorously there, even though the water isn't boiling. Okay, so in a second I'm going to remove the leaves from the boiling tubes and give them a rinse under some cold water to remove the alcohol and cool them down. And then we're going to add some starch to them to see what happens. Okay. Oh, incidentally, I've had to refresh the boiling water here on a couple of occasions, just to keep this hot and keep this ticking away quite nicely. Right, so let's try and get this done without damaging the leaves too much. So the first one is the leaf from our garden. Let's get that rinsed straight away actually. Okay, and then the basil leaf. Okay, right, so let's spread these leaves out and just have a quick look at them. Okay, So you can see the basil plant is normally a very rich green colour. In fact, once I've opened this leaf up, and this leaf has lost a lot of its bright green colour as well. But if I just go and grab another basil plant, we can see there that it's lost a lot of its colour. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just get a pair of scissors and I'll cut off a small section of each leaf. Okay, and we can put some iodine onto it, and hopefully after a couple of minutes we should see some starch, some blue-black colour of starch. So let's just flatten that a little bit. Okay, moment of truth. Now it's not going to be an instantaneous reaction like it is with rice, okay, which is mainly starch. Although here we are, if we can come right in on this one, you can already begin to see some black coloration forming here. So there's clearly some starch there. I think on the basil plant, just on the edges for now, we can see some black colour beginning to form. So actually the leaf from the weed in our garden was showing up more starch here. Okay. I would imagine if we leave this for a little bit longer, we would hopefully see a bit more starch. Okay, so what's this showing? Well, the iodine has gone blue-black. That means that there is starch inside this leaf. And as I explained earlier, if there's starch inside the leaf, then that means the leaf must have been photosynthesizing in order to produce glucose. Okay, sometimes if you need to do other experiments on a leaf to test for the presence of starch and other factors, actually one of the first things you need to do is de-starch the plant before you test it for other things to see if photosynthesis has happened. And so the way to de-starch a plant would just be to get your plant and put it in a cupboard or in a dark environment for 24 hours, and it would use up all of its stored starch. Okay, there we go. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the lesson. Bye-bye.